Amina's story did not begin with wealth, silk dresses, or golden walls. It began in a village where dust rose with every step, and the horizon carried both promise and despair. Her earliest memories were not of toys or laughter, but of her, mother's tired hands kneading dough under a flickering lamp, while whispers of hunger sat heavy in the room. Her father, a man of quiet dignity, often returned from the fields with more disappointment than harvest because the land was never truly his. No matter how hard he worked, it was always under the shadow of someone else's name, someone whose lighter skin gave them the right to own, while others were forced to borrow. Amina grew up watching this injustice, absorbing it like a wound that never healed. She saw her mother humiliated at the market when traders dismissed her as if her coins carried less worth. She saw her older brother beaten for daring to stand tall in front of a man who believed authority flowed in his blood. And she saw how women, especially, were expected to bow twice, once as Africans and again as women. But unlike many around her, Amina's spirit was restless. She noticed everything, how the wealthy families walked through town, as if the earth itself bent for them, how doors opened wider for those with lighter complexions, how opportunities seemed to evaporate when her people reached for them. The unfairness didn't just anger her, it shaped her. It gave her a hunger so sharp it cut through every obstacle that tried to block her path. When she became a young woman, she married a man who shared that same fire. Adeyemi, a dreamer with hands that built more than they were given. Together, they carried each other through days when failure threatened to drown them. They started with almost nothing: a borrowed cart, a few goats, and a belief that dignity was worth fighting for. Each step forward was a battle, but every victory made them stronger. Years passed, and what began as small trade soon grew into something greater. Adeyemi risked everything by expanding into transport, then farming, then trading across borders. Amina, far from being a silent partner, was the strategist. She had learned how people underestimated her, dismissed her opinions as mere whispers from a woman's mouth. But behind closed doors, it was her ideas that turned risks into profits, her caution that saved them from ruin, and her foresight that saw opportunities others were blind to. Wealth flowed slowly at first, like drops of rain before a storm, but eventually it surged, washing away the days of hunger and humiliation. The family became known, respected, even feared. Yet Amina never forgot the sting of her past. Gold and marble might cover her home, but the scars of being overlooked, undervalued, and mocked because of her skin and her origins remained etched deep within her soul. And then came her greatest blessing and greatest fear, her only son, Kelechi. Kelechi was born into a world very different from the one his mother had known as a child. By the time his first cries filled the air, the family's name was already attached to wealth, respect, and influence. He grew up in rooms where the walls gleamed with imported wood, and where servants hovered, ready to respond to the smallest sound. To the outside world, his life seemed effortless. A boy destined for greatness, surrounded by privilege and guarded from want. But Amina never allowed herself to forget what lay beyond those golden gates. She remembered vividly what it meant to be hungry, overlooked, dismissed as less. And she feared that her son, protected from those scars, might never recognize the poison that could hide beneath a smile. She did not fear poverty anymore. She feared betrayal, because she knew, better than most, that wealth could attract masks instead of hearts. As Kelechi grew, Amina watched him carefully. She saw that he inherited his father's kindness, his natural generosity, his openness to trust. He treated everyone with respect, from the cooks in the kitchen to the officials who sought his hand in business. He carried humility, like a second skin, never allowing arrogance to poison his steps. Yet, for Amina, that very goodness became a danger. A son so open-hearted could be broken by those who saw only his bank account. The years passed quickly. Suitors began to circle, not just for business, but for marriage. Elegant young women from powerful families appeared at parties, each one polished, each one smiling with the same rehearsed charm. They carried the perfume of wealth, the clothes of fashion, and the ambitions of empires. To most mothers, such daughters-in-law would be considered blessings. But Amina's eyes saw deeper. She had lived long enough to know the difference between a heart that loves and a hand that takes. Late at night, when silence filled the mansion, she would sit alone by the window, staring into the darkness, haunted by questions. Would her son ever find someone who loved him? Not the billionaire, but the boy within. Would he be able to see beyond the glitter to the truth? Or would he one day wake beside someone who smiled only at his fortune? Her fears grew sharper after she overheard conversations among certain guests, women speaking of her son as if he were a prize to be won, a ladder to climb, a title to boast of. Each careless word cut into her, reminding her of the very injustice she had lived through. People judging worth not by soul, but by status. It was the same poison, only painted with richer colors. And so the idea was born, not from sudden inspiration, but from years of quiet observation and the scars of her past. Amina understood something most overlooked. The true measure of a person was never revealed in how they treated the powerful, but in how they treated the unseen, the invisible, the ones with nothing to offer in return. She remembered the days when she herself had been invisible, walking into shops and being ignored, asking questions and being dismissed, bending over fields while others looked past her. She remembered the sting of being a cleaner in someone else's home, invisible yet listening, overlooked yet knowing the truth of every household. Those who carried arrogance always showed it most to the ones they believed had no value. So she decided, if her son's future wife truly existed, she would be found not in the grand halls of power, but in the small moments when no one else was watching. Amina would put on the plain clothes of a cleaner, tie a scarf around her head, and walk through her own mansion as if she were nothing. She would sweep floors, scrub dishes, bend her back to the work others ignored. And while she did, she would watch. She would watch every smile, every gesture, every whisper spoken in her presence. She would watch who showed kindness and who revealed cruelty when they thought no one important was listening. For weeks she prepared herself, practicing invisibility. She removed her jewelry, softened her posture, and trained her voice to carry the quiet tones of a servant. She allowed the staff to believe she was newly hired, and then, quietly, she began her mission, one broom, one rag, one silent observation at a time. Amina was no longer the billionaire's mother in those moments. She was something far more powerful, a mirror to the souls around her. The first morning of her disguise was almost surreal. Amina wrapped a faded scarf around her head, slid into an old uniform borrowed from one of the staff, and picked up a broom whose wooden handle was worn smooth from years of use. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The regal matriarch, who once commanded boardrooms and dined with presidents, had disappeared. In her place stood a weary, middle-aged woman with bent shoulders and tired eyes, blending easily into the background. She allowed herself a deep breath before stepping into the mansion's grand halls. The marble floors stretched wide, the chandeliers above scattering light like fragments of the sun. Normally, she would walk through those halls as their owner, her footsteps commanding respect. But today her steps were soft, almost apologetic. She lowered her gaze, careful not to make eye contact with anyone. She had lived long enough to know how invisibility worked. If you dressed plain enough, moved quietly enough, and carried a broom, people's eyes slid past you as if you were part of the furniture. And so, it began. That very afternoon, the first of the women arrived. She was introduced to Kalechi as the daughter of a wealthy business partner. She was radiant, adorned in jewels that sparkled brighter than her smile. Her voice dripped with sweetness when she spoke to Kalechi, her laughter carefully measured, her gestures elegant. But when her eyes flickered toward the cleaner sweeping in the corner, the sweetness vanished. Her lips curled, her nose wrinkled ever so slightly, and in that instant her true self peeked through the polished mask. "Careful! With that broom!" she muttered sharply, though loud enough for Amina to hear. "Don't scratch the floor. Do you even know how expensive this marble is?" Amina bent lower, murmuring a soft apology, her voice trembling like a servant's. But inside her heart was steel. She was not angry. Not yet. Instead, she observed, her suspicion confirmed. This woman's kindness was selective. To the powerful she offered charm, to the powerless, disdain. Throughout the visit, Amina moved silently, serving tea, wiping small spills, tidying corners no one noticed. Each time she passed close, she listened. The woman spoke of designer brands, exotic travels, and her vision of building an empire alongside Kalechi. Yet not once did she speak of love, family, or the simple joys of companionship. Her words were all ladders, each rung leading higher, but only toward herself. That night, when the guests had left, Amina sat in her tiny assigned quarters in the servants' wing. The room was simple. Bare walls, a single bed, a small lamp. She could have retired to her luxurious suite upstairs, but she chose this instead, to live fully within her disguise. She sat quietly, reflecting on what she had witnessed. Her heart sank. The woman had shown beauty and confidence, yes, but no humility, no empathy. She had failed the test. In the days that followed, others came. Some from wealthy families, some from distant connections. One after another, they smiled at Kalechi, showered him with compliments, and carried themselves with the polish of rehearsed charm. And one after another, they revealed cracks in their facades the moment their eyes landed on the cleaner. Some ignored Amina completely, as though she were invisible. Some barked small orders. "Bring more tea. Pick that up. Don't stand there." And one even whispered to another guest, mocking her presence. It's always the same with rich houses, so many of them, yet never properly trained. Amina endured it all silently, her broom moving across the floors, her hands scrubbing dishes, her ears absorbing every careless word. She carried the weight of disappointment like stones in her chest. These women, polished on the surface, revealed themselves in the small, unnoticed moments. The very moments she had built her plan around. Yet Amina's mission was far from over, because she knew, among masks, sometimes one true face hides. And she would not stop until she found it. The mansion had never been busier. Word spread quickly that Kalechi, the quiet yet wealthy heir, might soon be seeking a wife. Invitations flowed in, phone calls multiplied, and Amina, still hidden in her plain uniform, found herself silently serving through a parade of hopefuls. Each day brought a new test, and each day revealed more of the truth she already suspected. Many came, not for love, but for wealth. One afternoon, Amina found herself preparing the guest hall. The long table gleamed with silverware, flowers arranged to perfection, every detail designed to impress. When the young woman of the day arrived, she carried herself with the stiffness of royalty. Her complexion was fairer than most in the room, and she seemed to take great pride in it. She sat beside Kalechi with the air of someone doing the world a favor. When Amina approached to pour tea, the woman barely glanced at her. But then her words, light and careless, cut deep. Your staff is interesting, but perhaps, Kalechi, you might consider hiring people who present themselves better. After all, appearances matter. The remark lingered in the air, disguised as advice but dripping with insult. Amina's hands did not tremble, though inside, anger burned. It was not only the dismissal of a worker's dignity, it was the undertone, the unspoken suggestion that people of darker skin, people like her, somehow diminish the beauty of the room. She remembered her youth then, the market stalls where traders laughed at her mother's rough hands, the way lighter-skinned families were greeted first, the silent hierarchy no one spoke of but everyone felt. That same poison was here, dressed in elegant clothes, smiling sweetly at her son. When the woman left, Amina wrote her off in silence. She had failed not only in kindness, but in humanity. But the tests continued. Another day, a woman from a family of old money arrived. She was bold, quick with laughter, and spoke as though the entire mansion was already hers. She ordered staff around casually, correcting them with sharp gestures. When Amina passed with a tray, the woman tapped the glass sharply with her ring and said, without looking up, "This is lukewarm. Heated it again. Do you people not understand the basics?" The words stung, not because of the demand itself, but because of the you people. The careless grouping of workers as though they were beneath her, interchangeable, faceless. Amina nodded silently, taking the tray away, her disguise shielding her fury. But that night, in her small room, she let the memories surface. She thought of the nights in her youth when she had cried quietly after being denied entry to places where her skin was deemed unwelcome. She thought of her father's bowed head when his land was taken. And now, decades later, she sat in her own mansion, watching history repeat itself through women who believed power came not from love, but from dominance. Yet not all days were the same. One morning, as the sun painted the halls in warm gold, a young woman arrived, not in diamonds or silks, but in a simple, well-pressed dress. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her hair neatly tied, her eyes clear and unpretentious. Unlike the others, she did not immediately scan the room for wealth to admire. Instead, she noticed the workers. When Amina passed with a basket of laundry, the young woman stepped aside, smiling politely. Later, when tea was served, she softly thanked the server, something so small, yet rare among the others. And when she caught Amina struggling with a stack of plates, she instinctively reached out, steadying the load. It was a fleeting moment, almost invisible. But to Amina, it was like the first drop of rain after a long drought. She watched this woman closely, studying her every gesture. There was no sign of arrogance, no calculated charm, meant only for Kalechi. She laughed easily, not the sharp, forced giggle of those trying to impress. She spoke of simple joys, reading, teaching, children at the community center, her love for music. Her words were not ladders of ambition, but windows into a heart that seemed genuine. Still, Amina did not let herself trust too quickly. She had been deceived before, and appearances could be crafted, but deep in her heart, for the first time since her plan began, she felt a flicker of hope. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion became a stage where masks slipped in the shadows. For Amina, each day was a lesson in patience. Dressed in her cleaner's uniform, she moved silently, her hands busy, her ears sharp, her heart weighing every action she witnessed. The parade of women did not stop. Some were bold in their arrogance, treating her as though she were invisible. Others cloaked their disdain behind polite smiles, but their eyes betrayed them. Amina learned long ago that eyes rarely lie. They might soften before wealth, but they hardened when facing someone they deemed beneath them. One particular evening stood out. A lavish dinner was arranged, and several women were invited at once. A showcase orchestrated by friends and advisors eager to see Kelechi make progress. The hall glittered with candlelight, dishes lined the long table, and laughter echoed. Across the marble, Amina moved among them, pouring drinks, clearing plates, bowing slightly, as if her life were bound to the broom she carried. It didn't take long for the masks to crack. One woman leaned back in her chair, waving Amina over with a flick of her hand. "Wipe this quickly," she said, gesturing at a small spill. Her voice was laced with impatience, as though speaking to a child. Another whispered to her companion, not quietly enough. "You would think, in a house like this, the staff would at least be educated." The word stung, not for herself. Amina's pride was untouchable, but for every unseen worker who endured such treatment daily. She thought of the nameless faces in cities, bent over scrubbing floors while insults rained upon them. She thought of the generations silenced by the cruelty of those who measured worth by status and complexion. Yet amidst the arrogance, her eyes always returned to one figure, the young woman in the simple dress. She sat quietly, never trying to outshine the others, never forcing herself into Kelechi's attention. When Amina passed with a tray, the woman offered a gentle nod of thanks. When a servant stumbled, nearly dropping a plate, she reached out, instinctively to steady it, whispering reassurance. Amina's heart stirred, but she knew kindness could still be a performance. To be sure, she had to watch when the room wasn't looking. And so the test deepened. One afternoon, while the guests gathered in the garden, Amina deliberately, accidentally, dropped a small bucket of water near where the women walked. It splashed across the stones, dampening the edges of their gowns. The reactions came instantly. Gasps, sharp words, exaggerated disgust. "Watch! Where you're going!" one snapped. "Ruined my shoes!" another hissed, shaking the water from delicate fabric. But only one woman bent down, not to scold, not to sneer, but to help steady the bucket. She smiled softly at Amina, her voice calm. "Careful, you must be tired carrying so much all day." It was a sentence no one else would have spoken. It was the language of empathy. Amina felt a rush of emotion she had not expected. For years, she had been surrounded by people who calculated every word. Here, at last, was a woman who seemed to speak without calculation at all. But she was cautious still. Hope was a fragile thing, easily broken. She needed proof that this was no act, no fleeting politeness. She needed to see how this woman behaved when no eyes were watching. That night, long after the guests had gone, Amina lingered near the side corridors, hidden in shadows. She watched as the young woman passed by, speaking quietly to one of the junior staff, thanking her for the meal and offering to carry a small plate back to the kitchen. No audience, no applause, just sincerity. Amina's disguise had given her the power she needed, the power to see the truth unfiltered. And what she saw filled her with both relief and fear. Relief, because she had perhaps found the heart she sought for her son. Fear, because she knew the path to revealing that truth would not be easy. For if she had learned anything in her life, it was this: when wealth and power are involved, truth is always the hardest thing to protect. And so, with the stage set, Amina prepared to push her test to its breaking points. The day of reckoning came quietly, without announcement, without fanfare. Amina had watched long enough. The charade of polished manners and painted smiles had reached its limit. If her son's future was to be safeguarded, the moment of truth had to come now. She planned it carefully. A dinner gathering, smaller than the others, yet more intimate. Only a handful of women were invited, including the one who had stirred Amina's hope. She chose the setting deliberately, the mansion's garden, where the evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine, and the lanterns flickered with golden warmth. On the surface, it was to be an evening of laughter and soft conversation. But beneath the tablecloth, Amina had laid the foundation of her final test. She began by lowering herself even further into invisibility. Her scarf was worn thin, her shoes scuffed, her hands carrying the faint stains of polish from scrubbing. She moved slower that evening, intentionally clumsy, as though the weight of servitude had ground her down. She wanted to see who noticed weakness, who took advantage of it, who revealed themselves when they thought they were unobserved. The test began subtly. As the women sipped their drinks, Amina passed by with a tray of fresh fruit. She allowed her wrist to falter, and the tray tilted. A cascade of grapes rolled across the polished stone floor, some bouncing near the hem of gowns. Gasps filled the air. One woman snapped sharply, lifting her skirt as though filth had crept upon her. "Clumsy fool!" she hissed, glaring at Amina with eyes full of disdain. "Do you even know how to hold a tray? This is why some people should never be allowed in fine homes." The words sliced through the air, cruel not just in tone but in implication. Some people, the same poison that had haunted Amina's life, now spilling casually from lips too proud to know humility. Another woman joined in, laughing lightly, the sound edged with cruelty. Perhaps she was brought from the village this morning. Look at her hands. So rough, so untrained. Honestly, Kalechi deserves better staff. Amina bent low, gathering the scattered fruit with quiet movements, her face hidden. Inside, her heart pounded with both fury and satisfaction. The masks were slipping faster now. But then came the moment that froze her breath. As she reached for the last cluster of grapes, another hand touched hers gently. She looked up, and there was the young woman kneeling beside her. Not standing above, not barking orders, but lowering herself to the ground beside the servant. No one else saw. "Let me help," she said softly, her voice carrying no trace of performance, only sincerity. She gathered the grapes into the tray, her eyes kind, her smile steady. When she rose, she brushed her dress carelessly, unconcerned with the dust clinging to its fabric. The others scoffed. "You don't need to dirty yourself," one sneered. "She can manage. It's her job." But the young woman ignored them. She turned to Amina, placing the tray back in her hands with care, as though it were a gift and not a burden. "Take your time," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. In that instant, Amina felt her throat tighten. The test was not over, but her heart already knew. Still, she pressed forward. Later in the evening, she orchestrated one final trial. She carried a heavy pitcher of water, deliberately letting her steps falter as she approached the table. The pitcher tipped, and water splashed across the tablecloth, seeping toward the women's gowns. The reactions were immediate and sharp. One woman leapt to her feet, furious. "This is unbearable. Is this the standard of this household? How humiliating!" Another waved her hands dramatically, calling for someone else to clean the mess. The chorus of complaints rose quickly, venom disguised as shock. But again, one figure stood apart. The young woman reached for a napkin, pressing it gently against the spill, her movements calm, unbothered. She didn't scold, didn't glare, didn't treat the cleaner as invisible. Instead, she looked up at Amina and said softly, "Be careful. You must be exhausted carrying so much." It was the second time she had spoken those words, and in their repetition, Amina heard the truth. This was not performance. This was who she was. The night ended with laughter and farewells. But Amina's heart was no longer uncertain. She had seen enough. She had tested enough. The masks of arrogance had fallen, and the light of one true soul had shone through. When the mansion grew quiet, Amina removed her scarf for the last time. She washed the polish from her hands, straightened her back, and walked into her son's study, not as a cleaner, but as his mother. Her eyes burned with both weariness and triumph. Tomorrow she would reveal the truth, not just to her son, but to the women who had mocked her. And when that moment came, it would strike like thunder. The sun rose over the mansion, like a golden crown, spilling light across the sprawling gardens and grand walls that had, until now, hidden secrets within. For Amina, this sunrise felt different. It wasn't just another day of silent observation. It was the day of truth, the hours of pretending, of swallowing insults, of standing invisible in her own home were over. She dressed with deliberate care that morning. No scarf of a servant, no shoes scuffed from scrubbing floors. Instead, she wore a flowing gown of deep indigo, its embroidery shining faintly like threads of silver. Around her neck glimmered a pendant her husband had once given her, the same one she had hidden during her disguise. Her reflection in the mirror showed not a weary cleaner, but the woman she truly was, a mother, a matriarch, the keeper of both legacy and love. Her son, Kalechi, had not yet risen when she summoned the household staff, but her message was clear. Invite them back, every one of them. Tonight, there will be a gathering. By evening, the mansion buzzed again, with the rustle of silk dresses and the click of jeweled shoes. The same women returned, their laughter bright, their eyes sharp with curiosity. They had come expecting another evening of elegance, perhaps more subtle competition for the hand of a billionaire's son. None knew the storm, waiting beneath the calm surface. The grand hall had been prepared with deliberate symbolism. The long table gleamed with polished silverware and crystal glasses, yet at the head of the table stood no servant. Instead, Amina herself, dressed in regal dignity, waited. For a moment, confusion rippled through the guests. They looked at her, some tilting their heads, others whispering. Was this a guest they had not met? A relative? Then came the whispers, sharp and disbelieving. One woman leaned toward another, her painted lips curling. Is that not the cleaner? The one who spilled water? The one who crawled on the floor for grapes? The murmurs grew. Shock twisted into unease, unease into denial. They wanted to believe their eyes deceived them, but the truth was undeniable. Amina raised her hand, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. Yes, she began, her voice steady, resonant, carrying the weight of both pain and authority. The woman you saw on her knees, the woman you mocked, the woman you dismissed as unworthy of even your patience, that woman was me. Gasps filled the room. Some clutched their pearls, others stiffened, their faces paling under layers of powder. I am Amina, she continued, the mother of Kelechi. This house, these walls, this family, you came here believing it was yours to conquer. You came here with smiles for my son and daggers for those you thought beneath you. You believed a servant was invisible, her dignity disposable. But tonight, I strip away every mask. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the women who had spat venom at her when they thought her powerless. They could not meet her gaze now. Their arrogance had melted into trembling shame. But then she turned toward the young woman, the only one who had knelt beside her, who had lifted the weight of grapes and water without lifting judgment. You, Amina said softly, her voice breaking the silence not with accusation, but with warmth. You saw a human being where others saw only a servant. You gave dignity where others offered scorn. When no one was watching, when you thought it did not matter. You revealed your heart. The young woman's eyes widened, her breath caught, but she stood steady. She had not helped for reward, nor expected recognition. That was what made her different. Amina stepped closer, her voice carrying the fire of every wound she had ever endured. Do you see now? Wealth is not in gowns or jewels. Nobility is not in skin or class. True worth lies in compassion, and in this room, where so many claimed to seek love, only one carried it within her. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The women who had laughed at her mistakes now lowered their heads. Their pride, once sharp, lay broken at their feet. They had been exposed, not by force, but by their own cruelty. Amina's words turned toward them one final time. Racism, classism, arrogance. These are poisons. You carry them like perfume, believing they make you superior. But they reveal you instead. What is beauty without kindness? What is wealth without humility? You wanted my son, but you disrespected his mother. You dishonored yourselves. One by one, the women excused themselves, their footsteps echoing like confessions across the marble floor. The hall grew emptier, quieter, until only Amina, the young woman, and her son remained. Kelechi, who had witnessed the reveal in silence, now stepped forward. His face bore astonishment, but also pride. He looked at his mother, not with shock at her deception, but with admiration for her wisdom. He understood now why she had endured the humiliation. It was not just a test for the women, but a shield for him, protecting his future from those who wore kindness only as a mask. And, as he turned his gaze toward the young woman, something new burned in his eyes. Respect, not because his mother had chosen her, but because she had revealed herself through her actions, quietly, sincerely, without expectation. Amina rested her hand on her son's shoulder, her voice soft but resolute. My son, if you choose love, choose the heart that sees humanity. For beauty fades, wealth shifts, and status crumbles. But the soul, that endures. The story closed not with applause, but with truth. Amina's disguise had been more than a trick. It had been a mirror. And in that mirror, every mask had fallen away. The young woman remained by their side, her face calm yet humbled by the honor of being seen. The others, shadows now, would remember this night for years, not for what they gained, but for what they lost through arrogance. And as the night settled, the lesson lingered. In a world obsessed with wealth, beauty, and skin, the true currency of love and worth is kindness. So the question hangs in the air, as if Amina herself whispered it to every heart listening. When you meet someone who seems beneath you, will you reveal your cruelty or your compassion? Because in the end, it is not them who are tested, it is you.